Hello YouTube, LD50 here with an Amara build video that is based on melee and is exploiting the new groundbreaking Guardian perk. This build is credited to Command3r. I will link his channel in the description. Please go and check him out. He was the first person to find this interaction, and I thought I'd bring it to this channel and just explain it a little bit in my own words. So the most recent patch has given us some new Guardian perks. One of the Guardian perks is on the Enforcer tree. It's all the way down the bottom here, and it's called Groundbreaker. Melee attacks or slam will trigger an aftershock, dealing 25% of all non-melee damage you have dealt over the last 5 seconds. So to make this work, you build up damage, you melee. And then that melee will do, as it says, a quarter of all your previous damage for the last 5 seconds. But this has some interesting interactions. We're going to have a look at the equipment first before we have a look at the build, because the equipment is very specific for this build. It only works with certain items. So it works with the face puncher. It works with the face puncher because the face puncher is melee damage, and also this face puncher has the 300/90 anointment. It's important to have this anointment on the face puncher because we'll talk about that when we go through the build. Ideally you'd like to have a times 14 for bossing. Times 7 is good enough for mobbing. This will actually do bosses, and we'll be going through some gameplay after the build talk to demonstrate how this build can work in combat situations. This is also only a level 57 face puncher. Obviously with a level 60 it'll be doing a little bit more damage, but most of the damage is not coming from the gun card itself. Now, what Command3r found is that by using the spiritual driver, when activating an action skill, you apply an element to yourself. So you apply a damage over time, a dot to yourself. And what Command3r has found out that this dot counts towards your damage, non-melee damage, that activates Groundbreaker. Melee attacks or slam will trigger an aftershock, dealing 25% of all non-melee damage, and self-dot is considered to be non-melee. So in a way this is priming this Groundbreaker before it sort of gets used. I do urge you to go and check out Command3r's channel and his video on this as well. He explains it much better than I can. That will be in the description. But going back over to this, we have our face puncher with our 300/90 anointment. We have our spiritual driver because that is going to give us a self dot, and finally we need an elemental projector white elephant. If you weren't aware, an elemental projector will give you a multiplicative damage boost if you are suffering the same element. So by setting ourselves on fire or corrosive or shock, whichever our action skill happens to be, applying a dot to ourselves, that dot element, the element of that dot will be multiplicatively increased by 103%. The other things that it's good to look out for is any area of effect damage, or any splash damage and splash damage radius. You can see here that my spiritual driver is a lowly level 50. This is actually the best driver I've ever found for this build. Haven't seen one since. Your results may vary according to your own comm, but as long as you've got a driver, this build will work. Having a shield and having a grenade are optional. This build will work without it, but there are some advantages to having these things. Survivability, and in the case of using the Frozen Heart, when depleted, releases a large cryo nova dealing X amount of damage and freezing enemies. Well, the important thing to know there is that frozen enemies take 3 times melee damage. And with the particular comm that I have here, it's got a splash damage radius bonus. That might not be on your comm, but it's on mine. That will increase the radius of the cryo nova. And then a grenade, you could use a fish slap grenade, which is a melee grenade. You could use an ASE grenade, like a hex, for instance. This one wouldn't be a bad one to use. It would give us shock damage. Obviously this is not a Mayhem 10 grenade. It's going to do negligible shock damage, but it's going to give us 50% bonus cryo damage after action skill use. And if we use the fake grasp mechanic, so that is grasping without a target, we activate the action skill element anointments. So that is the basic kit setup. You obviously can change this to a different type of shield with an action skill element anointment on it, say for instance a transformer, or you could put on an old god, which is going to boost the elemental damage, and also this one happens to have an ASE elemental anointment, but I'll leave that up to you. You can experiment how you want. Now we're going to take a look at the build. Now I have built my build very, very slightly to Command3r. Not magnificently differently, but just a couple of things that I felt worked better for me. But the important parts of this build is what we will cover, and we'll try and give you a little indication where you might be able to put your points elsewhere. So on the green tree, it is important that we get down as far as find your center, because that is going to give us bonus melee damage. That is always a good thing, and with this build particularly a fine thing. And the other skill that we must get is Arms Deal, which will give us splash damage and importantly splash damage reduction. So when we put a dot on ourselves, it's less likely to kill us. Command3r likes to put all of his points in the first row into Root to Rise, giving a larger health pool. I personally like to use personal space because that is a huge multiplicative bonus, damage bonus, and the comm that I'm using is putting a single point into clarity, giving us a little bit of regen. So I've chosen to only put 2 points into Root to Rise. If you find that you need to be a little tankier and you're not worried about the damage so much, then take the points out of personal space and put them into Root to Rise. So on this build we had 5 in the top row. I chose to put 3 here and 2 there, 5 into Arms Deal, and then a single point into Find Your Center. Now I tend to use Speed Demon as my modifier, so I haven't put any extra points into Mindfulness. If you don't use Speed Demon, you might like to put some points here, as long as you have spare points. Right, we will go down the Mystical Assault tree. Now there's a slight difference with this particular tree from Command3r's. He has just put a single point into Do Harm, and he's put more points into Fast Hands for the reload. I did a little experimenting and I found that actually having the action skill boosted by Do Harm, because we're going to be using Ties That Bind, which we'll go over in a minute, that's action skill, and that is boosted by Do Harm. Now we wanted to quickly talk about the 300/90 anointment that we had on our face puncher. Well, that affects action skill damage through Ties That Bind. It also affects the Groundbreaker, so that's where we're getting this extra damage from. So I've put 5 into Do Harm. I didn't put any into Fast Hands, I didn't have any spare. And I've put a single point into Violent Tapestry just because it's a good idea to get the option to use these rush stacks. This isn't a rush stack build. We're not going to be fake grasking to get 99 stacks of do harm, but having the rush stacks is certainly not a bad thing in combat. I've put 5 out of 5 in Restless to bring my cooldown down a bit. Now, if you were to find a comm or an artifact that had cooldown on it, you might be able to sacrifice a few points and put them elsewhere. Currently I don't have that, so I'm putting 5 out of 5 into Restless. Now, Transcend, must put 3 out of 3 into there. And the reason being is that melee damage does not do crit damage, but the sticky bombs that the white elephant produce, as you can see, melee attacks have a 30% chance to attach a sticky bomb. Those sticky bombs will get crit damage, and on a large boss like Graveward, you obviously will be getting quite a lot of crits onto his crit spot. So having this boost here is welcome. I've put a single point into Alacrity to give me some reload speed based upon my rush stacks. As I said, it's not a rush stack build, but it will improve my reload. 1 point into Ascendant because it's Ascendant. It's not a bad thing to have Stillness of Mind break 0.75 seconds after being damaged. It just gives you that little extra time to for the ties that bind damage to work its way around the grasped targets. Now we must put 3 out of 3 into Laid Bare, and we must put 3 out of 3 into Wrath, because these both, number one, improve gun damage, but also improve gun damage after action skill use, and in this case when enemies are damaged by the action skill. A single point into Remnant because Remnant is affected by the 300/90 anointment, and overkill's a good thing. And then I've chosen to put a couple of points into Awakening. This was the second difference that I made to Command3r, just to improve the effectiveness of those rush stacks so that do harm does a little more damage when you have grouped targets. And then finally we're going to put a single point into Mystical Assault because we'd like to be able to use our action skill twice. And then finally we will come down the red tree. Now with the red tree, it's important that you get down as far as sustainment. You need at least 1 point here for survivability. It's a little bit of a glass cannon build this, but I think if you're going to be doing the sort of damage numbers that you're going to get out of the build, it's I think it's an equal trade-off to have you know, a little bit more fragility to your character. So 1 out of 5 in sustainment will give us a little bit of lifesteal. We're doing so much damage that 4% of, you know, perhaps well over 100 million damage is obviously going to fill our health bar straight up. So looking down from the top, now it's important this build relies on elemental damage. Normally for most Amara builds I wouldn't use Anima at all. It's a bit of a trap because you can end up damaging yourself. You stand near a barrel, the barrel goes off, you're in fight for your life. However, this build relies upon elemental damage and elemental status effect damage. That's dots to you and me. So we'll put 5 out of 5 there, and I'm putting 5 out of 5 into Infusion. That's because that puts my action skill element into the gun, and it puts 40% of the damage will be of my action skill element. Going down further, by putting a point here, we're also making sure that our melee damage has our action skill applied to it, no matter which source of melee damage we are using. So that is whether we're using the face puncher, whether using a straight up punch, or whether we're using a slam, then we will get the elemental bonus to our action skill. We will definitely want to have 5 out of 5 in Tempest because we want to boost this elemental damage as far as we can. So 5 out of 5 there. That will bring you down to the 4th row. Now I have put 3 out of 3 into Indiscriminate. I don't believe that Commander Keen has done so, but I happen to like that. It seems to have worked well in mobbing situations, and that allows us to get down as far as sustainment to put the single point that we've been talking about. So we'll just go past these skills once more time. There's the green tree, there's the blue tree, and there's the Fist of the Elements tree. And then finally we're going to have a look at our Guardian rank. So the skill that makes this work, now bear in mind that you will need at least 125 Guardian rank points to be able to get down as far as this Guardian rank perk called Groundbreaker. If you've been playing since the game has come out on a fairly regular basis, I would imagine that you will have sufficient points to get down here. But that is what makes the build work. So this is not going to work so well if you disable Guardian rank. So this is definitely a Guardian rank on build, not the sort of build you're going to be using for time trials and or competition use, but this is obviously just for your own personal pleasure. And then lastly, I'm just going to touch on the Mayhem modifiers that I use. They may seem a bit odd, particularly as it's a melee build. We're using Speed Demon, of course. I've spoken about that already, and the reason we do that is the driver comm, the faster you go, the more damage you do. So Speed Demon is an easy boost to the skill, to the speed of your character, which increases your damage immediately. I happen to like Healy Avenger and Drone Ranger because I feel that they're the least objectionable medium and hard modifiers. And then finally I have chosen Holy Crit. Now you may say, why have I chosen Holy Crit? Because non-critical hit damage is reduced by 50%, so that is all of our melee damage is reduced by 50%. However, our sticky bombs are counted as critical and they will get a 25% bonus. So it's a bit of a trade-off. With this build you want to be trying to go for crits as best as you can. If you just go for body shots all the time, perhaps it won't be as effective, but at the higher levels or end game content as they like to call it, by this point you really should be going for crits anyway, to make the game a bit more fun and to make it more efficient. So there we go. That's my particular thoughts on those modifiers. So that was the build. As I said, this is credited to Command3r. I'll leave description. I'll leave a link in the description to his channel. Please go and check him out. We're going to head on over. I think we're going to go to one of the trials first and run through that, and then possibly do a little bit extra on top of that, maybe a couple of bosses. So I'll see you over there. So welcome back. We're at the proving grounds for the trial of discipline at Precipice Anchor, and we're going to proceed through with this trial.
It is time to prove yourself once again.
Happy now? Right. Always useful.
Why can't I just shoot forever?
That one is facing it.
You want some of this, soldier? Failed you.
I am brimming. A fight? For me? Oh, you shouldn't have.
A new challenger. Fend for yourselves. Reloading.
So much power!
This intense. I should not have 0, 1, 1, 0. 0, 1, 1, 1.
Not today!
Ain't gonna die like this!
Competition inhibited.
Sacrifice! Against the ropes!
No, no.
That's an idiot! Who wants to kill? Ultimate!
Very well. You may continue.
So we're having no trouble clearing the areas. We'll proceed through this last area and then we will go and do the boss.
Stay clear! I got this!
Helping hand! Wasted my time! Armed and dangerous! Stay still!
Let us up the ante, shall we?
Right, we'll just change our action skill to corrosive for the final boss.
Step on up, win a prize!
It ends now.
Love an extra set hand! So much power! Stop struggling!
there we go, final boss down. We'll just finish the trial off, and we'll just review our skill tree again one more time. That's our brawl tree, that's our mystical assault tree, and that's our fist of the elements tree. I think we might just pop over and do a couple of bosses now to show this build off against a boss.
Shoot that one and thank me later. Be still. Feel the power. This is all too easy. Happy now? Thanks, guys. Right. Stay still. Back off. Power. It's on now. Who wants a free kill? Sacrifice.
Well, that's the build and a little bit of showcasing of the combat using this build. I do urge you to check out Commander Keen's channel for his original build video, but this was just my take on it. We're just going to conclude by quickly reviewing our gear and our skill trees. If you have enjoyed this content, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It would help me out enormously. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.